So, welcome, my dear old pal, to Jinky's Chinwag, Billy Sloan. How are you, Billy?
Very well, Jinky. It's good to see you, albeit on a computer screen. I don't know where you are, but it's great to see you.
Yes, I'm at the. This is where we do the live in the loft at Susan's house, and I know we've been doing it. But obviously, you're on the radio when you're doing your show in Glasgow with the BBC when we're doing our wee live in the loft sessions. But hopefully, somewhere down the road, we'll get you up to enjoy it. Um,
See, when I joined the BBC, they said, "When do you want the programme?" And I said, "When does Jinky do the live loft thing?" And they said, "It's a Saturday night." I says, "Put me on at exactly the same time so I don't need to listen to him." I've got a good excuse for not having to join the programme, but there you go.
no, you're quite right. So I mean, no, I know that. I know that. Listen, it's all everything that we've been through. There's lots of things that I don't know about you, Billy, and there's lots of things I'm sure that a lot of my fans won't know about you. Can you can you tell me just right off the bat? I'm going to take you back to 12 years old, and you're in the house, and with your family, and are you as keen and as eager in music back then as you are now?
I mean, when I was 12, we grew up in a place called Townhead in Glasgow. We stayed in two different houses. We stayed in number 24 Martyr Street when I was, a little kid. And then, maybe when I was about 7 or 8, we moved to 30 Martyr Street, which was the next close. And it was a tenement flat. Now, if you're driving into Glasgow from Edinburgh, along the M8, and you just pass the Royal Infirmary on the left hand side. If you're in a car, just if you look over, just as we pass the Royal Infirmary, there's a place called the Pits, football pitches, five-a-side pitches.
Yeah.
And if you go to pitch, I think it's pitch number 11. That is almost exactly where our house was. It stood there, and it was a kind of tenement flat. Mother and father, me, my brother and sister, in a room and kitchen, outside toilet, no bathroom, no washing machine, no fridge, no telephone, no central heating. When you think about it now, it was kind of slum housing, but it was great. I loved living in the tenement, and it really was sort of part of my formative years because that old Glasgow cliche, you never just had one mammy up the close. You had, six mammies up the close. Everybody kind of looked after you, and if your own mother wasn't in, the next door neighbour took you in and gave you a biscuit and something to eat until your mother came back. So it was a great time in my life. And of course, inevitably to that, there was a soundtrack. And the soundtrack was the music of the 60s, because in 1967, as you mentioned, I would have been 12 in December of that year, but in the summer of love, I was 11 years of age. So you were hearing all this great music for the first time, the Beatles and the Stones and the Kinks and the Who and Dusty Springfield and the Monkees and Jimi Hendrix and all that kind of stuff. And although, I didn't have money to buy a record, and we didn't even have a record player in the house. So, there was nobody playing, it wasn't as if my parents had a record collection. You were seeing Top of the Pops, obviously, every Thursday night. And, my mother was a great one for the radio. So she would switch on the radio when she was doing the ironing or doing the cleaning. And there was a program which I vividly remember called Workers' Playtime
Right.
on at lunchtime. And, I think they did it each day from a different factory or a place of work in the canteen. So, they'd be in, some car factory one day and then some biscuit factory the next day and then some carpet factory the day after that. And they would take requests from the employees. But, there was a certain amount of music in that. And it was things like, it wasn't pop music as such. It was things like Green Door by Frankie Vaughan. That's a record that sticks out in my mind. And also there was a song called Just in Time. I'm not quite sure who was it sung that, but that it was sort of more crooners,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So that was your introduction to music, but slowly but surely, you were seeing all these bands and Top of the Pops, and we'd had news agents at the corner of Martha Street and Parliamentary Road called Hughie Templeton's, Hughie's News Agents. And he would have all the music papers and stuff like that. And I remember vividly seeing, I think it was the disc in Music Echo with the Monkees in the front cover. and they had those sort of double-breasted, maroon shirts,
Yeah.
the two banks of buttons, and you just thought, I want a shirt like that, you were watching the Monkees TV show, and the Beatles was the kind of soundtrack. Because when I was a kid, we used to play at the Beatles. When we were up in somebody's house, and if it was raining and we couldn't go out to play football, we used to play at the Beatles. And I vividly remember standing in my mate's, I was going to say living room, but it wasn't a living room. It was just a sort of room and kitchen, standing in my mate's kitchen where his mother was, making the dinner, and we would be playing at the Beatles, and we'd stand and sing the Beatles songs and kid on with guitars, and we'd a couple of knitting needles as the drumsticks and all that kind of stuff. So, you were very much aware that there was something going on. They say the swinging 60s.
Yeah.
And even if for an 11-year-old child, it was swinging. There was an electricity in the air. You didn't quite know what was happening, but you knew something was happening. And it all happened to a soundtrack of the people that I mentioned previously. It was an incredibly exciting time because you knew something was going on. You just couldn't, because you were so young, put your finger on exactly what it was.
And back then, did you ever remember your mum and dad ever saying that they were going to a concert or they were going to a show, or do you ever remember that?
No, nothing like that. Nothing like that. I mean, the only thing I remember vividly was, I think it would have been about maybe 63 or 64 when the Beatles came to play the Odeon. And I asked my dad, so let's just say it was 1964 for the sake of argument. I would have been 8.5. And I asked my dad, going to take me down to the town to see if we can see the Beatles. I thought, you just walked down to the Odeon and there they were, standing at the front door waving to everybody. No, I'm not going near any of those screaming lassies. No, you'll be pandemonium down there. And, the thing about Townhead was, where we lived, it was only about, maybe a third of a mile from the city centre. If we left our house and walked down Parliamentary Road, you eventually came to the junction of Parliamentary Road and Buchanan Street, exactly where the concert hall is now. So, we could have walked from the house in about maybe 15 minutes. So, had I been old enough, I would have done myself, but, it was night time and I wasn't allowed out late because I was only 8. And I wanted him to take me down to see the Beatles, but he refused point blank, because it would just be all these screaming, hysterical lassies. So, no, I don't ever remember them going to concerts.
So you've got your passion then. You've got your passion then. I mean, there's not many people that you would certainly not many people that I know, 8 years old, that are asking to go and see, a band as such, their favourite band. I mean, I can see people at 12 or 13 want to go and see Ariana Grande and and maybe but at 8 years old, you've obviously got a passion for music, even that young.
I wasn't even going to see the band, I wasn't even bothered about going to see them play. Had somebody said, here's a ticket, go and see the Beatles, I would have jumped at it. But just even to see them and getting out their van or their bus or their limousine and walking and waving to everybody as they went in the stage door. I mean, the only thing I remember about that is that where we lived in Martyr Street, at the corner of Martyr Street and Parliamentary Road, as I say, exactly where the football pitches are now, around the corner from that, literally a 2-minute walk around the corner, were two very famous cinemas, one called the Carlton and one called the Casino. They were opposite sides of Castle Street. And, that's where we would go on a Saturday. You would get your money and you would go into the Saturday afternoon. And in those days, you saw 2 movies. You saw the sort of B movie and sat through a film for an hour and a half. And then there was a 20-minute interval. And then you sat through the main movie. So I remember going to see things like, and there was a musical element. I remember my mother taking, because she was a great one for going to the movies. I remember my mother taking me when I was a child to see the Hank Williams story. And I'd never heard of Hank Williams. I didn't know who Hank Williams were, but suddenly I was sitting in this darkened cinema with my mother and a packet of sweets, watching the biography, the movie biography of this country singer from America, from Nashville. I also remember vividly that was in the Casino, but across the street was the Carlton. And I remember my old man taking me, because I asked, you've got to take me. And I remember him taking me to see Help when it came out, when the Beatles Help. And of course, that must have been a the longest tours of his life, because it wouldn't have been the kind of movie I think he would have chosen to go to. He'd have rather gone and seen a war film or a cowboy film, but gone to see the Beatles,
Yeah.
larking about in the Bahamas or wherever it was. But I remember when we were sitting watching Help, and if you remember, Help had at least a semblance of a storyline, whereas Happy's Night was just like a kind of almost like a sort of a fly in the wall kind of thing. But I remember when we were sitting watching Help, the cinema backed onto the canal bank, the old canal, and somebody was in the canal bank, and they started banging on the brick wall, and they burst a hole in the wall, trying to get in to see the film for nothing and all that. But I mean, I remember that. The other thing I remember is 67. I remember seeing, I think it was Boxing Day of 67, when the Beatles premiered Magical Mystery Tour.
Right.
And I think it was in black and white from memory, and sitting watching, I Am the Eggman and Your Mother Should Know, and all that kind of stuff, and all the crazy stuff that happened in the bus with the big fat woman, shoveling the spaghetti onto John Lennon's, the guy shoveling the spaghetti onto John Lennon and the big fat woman's plate. So I remember that vividly. The other thing I remember vividly is when they did that telecast, when it was All You Need Is Love. I think there was some big world telecast. I can't remember what it was called. And the Beatles was the British end of it, so 1 minute they were in Germany, the next minute they were in Holland, the next minute they were in America. And it was one of the first big kind of satellite link-ups they did, and the UK contribution to that was the Beatles performing All You Need Is Love with the orchestra. Wow. All the audience sitting there. There was Mick Jagger sitting in the audience clapping his hands, and the Beatles performed All You Need Is Love. So you were getting that kind of exposure to stuff by what was on the radio, because a lot of people will say, oh, I learned about music through my parents' record collection, but we didn't have a record player. So, my parents didn't have a record collection.
So did you, when you were at school in Townhead, what school did you go to?
I went to a school in Townhead in St James's Road, and the school was called St David's Primary.
St David's Primary. So,
and the plan was that you went to St David's Primary, and then you went to a place, if you were really clever and you were in the top, 5 in the class or something, there was a chance that you could go to Alan Glen's, which was a really kind of posh school round the back of St David's. It was kind of down on a Cathedral Street.
Yeah.
And that was the dream ticket. If you got to Alan Glen's, that was a big deal. But if you couldn't get to Alan Glen's, you went to a primary, a secondary school, which was exactly next door to our primary, called City Public.
Right.
And it was a bit more rough and ready. But by the time it came to my secondary education, we moved from Townhead up to Springburn. And I was always quite clever at school. I was always, first or second in the class, and I've still got all my prizes from when I was wee, for general excellence, as they called it, when you were, first in the class and you went up to the prize given at the end of the year. And because I was in the first top 5 in the class, when we moved up to Springburn, I got to go to Albert Senior Secondary. And that was a school that you had to kind of win your way into. So that was my first exposure of having to wear a school uniform and a shirt and tie and all that, because we'd never done anything like that at primary school. And certainly, had I gone to City Public, you would just have worn exactly what you wore, when you were going to play football with your mates. But suddenly, we moved up to Springburn, and I was expected to wear the school uniform and with the badge and the thing. But it was great, it was a real good time. So, what I was saying about not having a record collection, I mean, for somebody who's spent something like 40 odd years in music journalism, I never bought my first record until I was 15.
Wow.
We went away with the Boys Brigade camp to Rhyl in Wales, and I used up virtually all of my 2-week camp pocket money going into Woolworths in Rhyl, and I bought Won't Get Fooled Again by The Who, the 7-inch single in the blue picture sleeve, which I've still got to this day. And I bought The Who live at Leeds. So I'm proud to say my first single was Won't Get Fooled Again, and my first album was The Who live at Leeds. And then when I brought it home, I had nothing to play it on. We didn't have a record player. And my mother went to Arnott and Simpson's. You remember that department store?
Yeah.
At the junction of Jamaica Street and Argyle Street and St Enoch Square. And she bought, a lot of people won't even know what I'm talking about when I say this, but she bought what you would call a radiogram, which was a piece of furniture. And it looked like a small sideboard. And when you opened up the right-hand side of it, there was a record turntable which played records at 45 for a single, 33 for an album, or 78 if you'd one of the old Bakelite, 12-inch singles for yesteryear. And then in the left-hand side, you opened it up and there was a cabinet to put all your records in. And, for about 3 or 4 months, when you opened the cabinet, you had 2 records, my single and my album. And I just used to sit and play live at Leeds over and over again. And if you remember, and again, a whole generation of people listening to this won't even know what I'm talking about, but if you lifted the arm off the radiogram, it just played the record, and then the needle went back to the start and it played it again, and it went back to the start. So you could listen to side one of the Who live at Leeds 3 or 4 times in a row, and then get up and flip it over and then listen to side 2 3 or 4 times in a row. So as I say, when you think of kids now, even the youngest kids, I was talking to you a moment ago about being 7 or 8, 7 or 8-year-old kids have got a phone or an iPad with 10,000 of their favourite songs on it, or they've got YouTube, or they've got, Spotify, or that kind of stuff. We never had anything like that. And as I say, for somebody who's spent 40 years in music journalism, I was something of a late developer. But
Yeah.
the whole impact of getting your first record and getting your first single, getting your first album, and significantly going to your first gig. I mean, I went to my first gig on the 21st of October, 1971, went to see the Who at Green's Playhouse. And it sounds dramatic to say it, but it was a life-changing moment. I mean, the reason I'm sitting here right this second, having had 40 incredible years in journalism and broadcasting, is all to do with that one night of going to see those 4 guys up in that 25-foot high stage, 30 feet away from me, and the volumes and the laser beams, and 3,500 people going crazy around about me. It was my eureka moment.
What are you doing? I mean, if that changes your life, and that changes Billy Sloan's career direction, what is your direction just prior to that? What are you thinking you're going to be? What's your dad telling you you're going to be? What's your mum saying to you? What's Billy Sloan going to be?
Well, my mum and my old man worked in the docks. He was a crane driver in the docks, in Queen's Dock and in Rossie Dock and in Princess Dock in Glasgow. And he also at one point used to drive the Finnieston crane. I mean, there's a story in the papers today that they're going to kind of refurbish the Finnieston crane and get it working again and make a cafe in it and a visitor centre and a museum and stuff. And he actually, as a young man, drove the Finnieston crane. And I remember when I was a wee boy, him taking me to, I think it was Princess Dock, which was in Govan, and taking me up into his crane to, see it, so I climbed up the ladder fearless, and he climbed up behind me. You would never get away with it now. The health and safety guy would be going nuts. And I don't remember how we get back down from the ladder, but we must have done it. And sitting up in the little, crow's nest where he was always, his gear sticks and all that kind of thing. But like any mother and father from a working class family in West Central Scotland, it was always stick in at school, because as I said to you earlier, I was quite good at school. Until I went to secondary, and I was good for the first couple of years until you then discovered music and football and girls, not necessarily in that order, but that kind of, you take your eye off the ball. But when I was wee, it was always, you need to get a good job, you need to be a clerk. I'm not quite sure what that involves. Get a clerk, or you need to work in the bank. So the dream ticket was, you get a job in a bank, or you get a job in an office or something. So that was the aim. But I was quite arty when I was wee. I liked drawing and I liked painting. So my uncle had been a commercial artist. So I was thinking maybe I could get into some of that. He'd been a commercial artist. He used to do the posters for the old Empire Theatre in Surrey Hall. And I was thinking about doing something like that. But I never really had any basic career plans. But it changed on the 21st of October. 71, at the Greens Playhouse. I think the ticket was 85 pence, and the Greens Playhouse was essentially a cinema. It wasn't a concert venue.
So are you 16 at this point? How old are you at this point?
71. I'm 15. I'm not quite 16. If it's October, I'm 16 in December, so I'm still 15 and a bit.
Right.
And they sold the tickets from House of Clydesdale, the electrical store in in Sauchiehall Street. So if you're in Sauchiehall Street at the moment and you walk out of Watterson's bookshop and you walk straight across the street, right there was a little electrical shop which doubled for some reason as the box office for the Greens Playhouse. And I had to beg, and I mean beg my old man, beg him to sleep out overnight with my mates in the pavement, because at that time Sauchiehall Street wasn't a pedestrian precinct. There was still traffic going up and down it, and folk coming to pubs at midnight and going to the dance and all that kind of stuff, and guys fighting and blah, blah, blah. And I had to beg him, and I really mean beg him, to camp out overnight with a sleeping bag with my mates. And then at 10 o'clock on the Sunday morning, these two wee women arrived, like your mother and her pal, and they had their little flask of soup and a wee Tupperware dish with their sandwiches in it, and they went into the back shop of House of Clydesdale. And you know, they sat at a little kind of trestle table, a bit like one of those tables you get if you were wallpapering, you know, in the house, decorating the house. And they had books of tickets, and you went in and you bought 2 tickets or 4 tickets. And
so how many people were sleeping outside along with you guys?
So if you imagine, if you walk out of Watterson's and cross the street, it was right there, right next to where Marks and Spencer's is now.
Yeah.
So the queue started there, and it went down to Hope Street, and then it went up Hope Street, and then it went right along Renfrew Street to the back of where Marks and Spencer's is, and then round into Cambridge Street. So there was thousands of people there. And that was a common occurrence. I mean, even when it became the Apollo in 1973, you know, they had their own box office. You know, I remember queuing out for tickets for, you know, the Rolling Stones or the Faces or stuff like that. But, you know, when you bought the ticket, in fact, I've got the original ticket of the gig that I was at in 71. And if you look at it really closely, underneath the information, you know, with the date and the band and the price and the seat number, you can see the House of Clydesdale stamp on it. And so you went in and you walked past the vacuum cleaners and the fridges and the washing machines and the hairdryers and the what do you call it, the curling tongs, and you bought 2 tickets in the back shop for these 2 wee women that were sitting still. So you know, that moment was an awakening, and
Yes.
and again, it sounds dramatic to say it, but it was that profound. And I thought I would love to do that. And while I would love to have been a swivel-tip rock star like Robert Plant or Roger Daltrey or Paul Rodgers or Free, I kind of knew my musical limitations. So I thought that if I can't get in as a performer, I'll get in as a journalist. I didn't think about being a music journalist. I just sort of wanted to get into journalism. And, you know, I thought that's maybe the route I can take. And, you know, I can maybe combine journalism and combine music and sort of have a love of the two at the same time. So that's basically how it transpired.
And do you, when you sort of ascertain that at 16, say 16, 17, you know, and your dad's giving you a bit of, you know, a bit of advice more than grief, because they didn't always give us grief, but they get giving us advice, and, you know, and their ways of the world and where we should follow on. So do you start a career at this point in something else, and then take me from the start of your career, the whatever that may be, whether that was up heading towards the shipyards with your dad, the docks, and then take me to the young Billy Sloan who agrees to write something for somebody.
Right, I stayed on at school. You know, I got my O levels. Like, I think I get O levels in English, art, and history. And I then what happened next? I then sat my hires, and I made a bit of history in Albert Secondary because I sat my O level maths and failed it miserably. But I sat my O level arithmetic and no, let me get this right. No, I sat my O level arithmetic and failed it miserably. But I sat my O level maths, and that was a hard one. So I passed the hard one and I flunked the easy one, right? Then I went on to hires, you know, higher grades. I don't know what you would call them now, but I got art and I got English and I got history again. So I basically came out of the school with 3 hires and 4 O levels. But significantly, what I also did was I took an extra O level, because in my final year at school, you could take a thing called secretarial studies. And secretarial studies was typing and office practice. So, of course, when word went around the school that I had put my hand up to enrol in secretarial studies, you can imagine the stick I got, because that was something that the girls did.
Lassies, that was a lassies gig.
That was a lassie's gig, but there was kind of method in my madness, because in the middle of winter, when it was like, snowing and the rain was howling, I was sitting in a class with 30 lassies, and I was the only guy in the class, and it was typing. So it was sitting, teaching you how to type and teaching you how to touch type. So, I mean, I've to this day got a great typing speed. I can sit and type, I can look away and type. If the worst ever came to the worst, I don't even know if they exist anymore, but I could get a job as a typist somewhere. I've got a pretty good typing speed. The only thing that I didn't get was shorthand. I didn't do shorthand, but I did typing, and I got them O level in it, because I was even thinking then I want to get into newspapers, so it would help if I could type.
Right.
So I got my typing, my office practice, secretarial studies O grade. So when I left school, what was my first job when I left school? My first job when I left school was my old man knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who got me a job in a security company, working in the office, just doing the filing and answering the phones and all that kind of stuff. And then again, it was, somebody who knew my uncle was a gaffer in the old Glasgow Corporation, a maintenance department.
Right.
And he was the plumber's gaffer. He was a guy called Andy Kennedy. He was a great guy. And their depot was in Parney Street, just exactly behind Glasgow Cross. Now, their depot was what is now the Tron Theatre.
Brilliant.
The Tron Theatre was their depot. So anytime I go and see a play at the Tron, it brings back real memories for me, because when you walk into the box office, that's where we stored all the corrugated iron. So if you've got a shop and some nutcase caves your window in at 2 o'clock in the morning drunk, you phone up the council, go, my window's been smashed in my newsagent shop. So they would send the team out in the lorry, and they would have the big sheets of corrugated iron, and they'd hammer them on to cover the window until you could get the glazier out the next day. So we, right where the box office of the Tron Theatre is where we used to stack all the sheets of corrugated iron. And in the actual theatre, if you're sitting watching a play in the Tron, in the actual theatre was where the plumber's store was. So I can't sit in the theatre without thinking of, over there in the corner was all these ceramic sinks. Over in that corner was all these toilet cisterns and, toilet bowls. Over in the other corner, was all the copper piping, and over the other corner was all the taps and all the fittings to make all this. So it always brings back great memories. So that was maybe the best job I ever had, because I get sent onto a building site in Anderson, exactly where Anderson bus station used to be. It was a big office block, and it was just an empty shell, and we were going in there to turn it into offices. And I was labouring, carrying bricks and carrying wood and and that kind of stuff. But you were all.
And are you dreaming then of being a journalist?
Absolutely, because when I'm on the job, there's 150 joiners and plumbers and plasterers and electricians. So you can imagine what the part was like, on the job. And I would be sitting reading my books and stuff, and they'd all be sitting reading, some dirty magazines or something like that. But the other reason it was great is it was right across the street from the Albany Hotel in Bottle Street, which doesn't exist anymore. And I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. In '76, the Bay City Rollers were playing at the Apollo, and I bought a ticket to go and see them because I'd missed the Beatles, as I told you earlier, and I wanted to go and see something that was a real pop phenomenon. The Screaming Lassies, and something that generated that kind of hysteria.
The mania.
The mania, yeah. So I mean, there was like 3,000 kids all dressed in tartan for 2 days outside the Albany Hotel, and every time a delivery van went in taking fresh laundry or stuff for the kitchen, they thought the rollers were being smuggled into their rooms and stuff. So you can imagine the abuse I got when word spread around the building site that I was going to see the Bay City Rollers. I mean, my life was, what are you going to see them for? I mean, I'm cleaning up what was said, but and you were right slap bang in the middle of the city centre, so you could walk along to Lewis's department store, which is now Debenhams, in Argyle Street, where HMV is. and that was Lucy's department store. And not only did they have the most amazing food department on the ground floor with big, turkeys and big sides of beef and hams and all that kind of stuff you'd never seen before. But in the basement, they had a brilliant record department, an amazing record department in the basement, and they had the wee booths where you could go in and say to the guy, could you put on, such and such a new album, and you could go in and listen to it. And even though I didn't have the money to go in and buy records, it was just to go in and hang about these places, because a lot of the guys that went there were all sort of suited and booted and mods, and the girls all wore great gear and stuff. So it was just a good place to hang about. So while I was working in the building site, I was thinking, how do I get into this? But it was a bit catch-22 in those days, because to get a job in a newspaper, you had to have a union card. And to get a union card, you had to be working for a newspaper. So it was a bit of a catch-22. So what I did was, when I lived in Springburn, I wrote a letter to my local newspaper, which was the Springburn Times. And I said, look, I noticed that you don't have a music column in the paper. I'll write one for you for free, on the condition that you put my name on it by Billy Sloan. And I thought, if they publish a few of my articles, I can keep a scrapbook. And then if I ever go for a job with a newspaper and the guy says, what have you done? I can produce a scrapbook and go, well, here's some of my published articles. So when I did that, just by sheer luck, talk about being in the right place at the right time, it was two newspapers. The office was in Bishopbriggs, so it was the Bishopbriggs Times and the Springburn Times. The Bishopbriggs, as you know, is quite a kind of middle class, affluent area, so it was a sort of back and front door, and everybody had a garden, and everybody had a car in the driveway, and they went to Mallorca a couple of times a year. But Springburn was a complete opposite, really working class, a lot of poverty, and they, Bishopbriggs was a fairly kind of apathetic place in terms of the local paper. You really had to struggle to get material for it. But Springburn, the people of Springburn would use the local paper with which to sort of, as a sword of authority, so that you would get a phone call saying, they're getting rid of the lollipop man at Elmvale School. This is ridiculous. You're the local paper. What are you going to do about it? So suddenly we start a big campaign to save the lollipop man. And the MP for Springburn at that time was a guy called Michael Martin, who went on to become the Speaker of the House of Commons. He's passed away now, sadly. He was a lovely guy. And he was a sort of up-and-coming councillor. And, but he was a great help to me when he was a councillor and also when he was an MP. So, I got a job. They offered me a job in the local paper. And at that time, I was earning about 80 quid a week with all the overtime and double time and time and a half in the building site. And the wages were £19.50. And I thought, how do I go from 80 quid a week to £19.50? But I thought, I'm never going to get another chance. I'll just need to bite the bullet and do it. And I did it. And it was great. I mean, literally the first day I arrived on the job, we were in this tiny little office, which didn't have a toilet. I mean, readers used to come up to hand, the competition entries in and go, is this a Bishopbriggs Times? I thought it was a derelict building, I mean, we didn't even have a toilet. It must have contravened every Health and Safety Factories Act, that was known to man. But, literally the first day I was on the job, the guy who was the boss was a great guy called Andy Patterson, said, right, James Gilmore has just won up in, Lomond Drive, has just won £1,000 in a spot the ball contest. Go and find out what he's going to spend the money on. So literally 2 minutes later, I'd be champing the door and you'd come to the door and I'd say, Mr. Gilmore, I believe you've, won a spot. Well, aye, son. So I'd talk my way into your house and interview you with a photographer. And then, 5 minutes later, I'd have you up holding a picture of your cheque with a thumbs up going, I'm going to...
What did he spend his money on?
I don't know. I think he's going to buy a washing machine or going to go for a 2-week holiday in Mallorca. But it was great. I mean, 1 minute you were covering a council meeting, the next minute you were covering the local BB team playing football against somebody, the next minute you were covering, a Girl Guide display, the next minute you were interviewing somebody that won spot the ball. So, in those days there was two ways to do it. You could go to Napier College in Edinburgh, which was a recognised journalism course. I think that was the only one in Scotland, but I was a wee bit too old for that. I was about 19 by that time. So, the local paper one was the route for me. And it really was sort of, you really did get taken up to the diving dale and they kicked you off and you went into the deep end, and you either sank or you swam, and I luckily managed to swim, and it was great training. And the woman who was the editor, who was a woman who's a friend to this day called Nina Young, and her husband then was a guy called Noel Young, who also happened to be the deputy editor of the Sunday Mail. And they were looking for somebody to do the pop column, because the pop column had been done by this brilliant guy, he's no longer with us, called Scott Robinson, who did the sort of showbiz pages, and he also did the the pop column. But Scott he looked a bit like John Cleese. He was a great guy, big skinny guy with a moustache, and he never ever went to any gigs, and he didn't know any bands and stuff. So he wasn't really sort of the guy to do the job, and he was also in his mid-50s by that time, or early 50s by that time. So they needed somebody to do it. And Noel Young asked me if I would like a go to it, and I jumped at the chance. And at that time, the Sunday Mail was the biggest selling paper in the whole of Scotland. So they got me to do a column. But as I was still working for the Springburn Times, they wanted to put it under a different name. So I don't know what year it was. I think it'd be 79. I went to the Ingolston Festival that Pete Irvine and Barry Wright from Regular Music. It was one of the first big outdoor gigs in Scotland, and it was Van Morrison, Talking Heads, The Undertones, Steel Pulse, the Valves, all in the same bill. And of course, there was no mobile phone, so they had been trying to contact me, and they couldn't contact me because they wanted to know what to call the column. And they couldn't contact me, so they just made a sort of decision on the day, because of course the paper was going to press. And when I get back at 2:00 in the morning into Glasgow off the bus to, from Ingolston, I went to the nearest, all night, newsagents or all night, garage or whatever to buy, the Sunday Mail to see my first ever column in Scotland's biggest paper. And I opened it up, and it said "Pop Gossip by the Disco Kid." I was like, so of course I phoned up Noel Young on the Monday. I went, "Oh, what's that? The Disco Kid?" Because they, it was all middle-aged guys. They never, the Disco Kid, right? So of course you can imagine what it was like when I went down the local pub for a game at Pool. Oh, here comes the Disco Kid! No, like, make way for the Disco Kid. And in fact, I've got a poster up my wall. When you used to go to newsagents, it doesn't happen as much now. And outside they were saying the Daily Record today, Rangers and Celtic, Old Firm sensation or something. Well, they did these Disco Kid posters outside the newsagents, and they were outside every newsagent shop from the Borders to John O'Groats. So I've got the Disco Kid, Scotland's #1 pop writer.
Was your mum and dad, was your parents really proud at this?
Oh, aye, because they bought the Sunday Mail, they bought the record 6 days a week, and then on the Sunday they bought the Sunday Mail and the Sunday Post. So, for the son, then what they did was for about 6 months, I was the Disco Kid, and then they unmasked me, and it was a Pop Gossip by Billy Sloan, and then so I did the Sunday Mail from 79 to 83. And then a job came up on the Daily Record, and I went for it thinking I'll never get it. They were interviewing 13 people, and I was the first person they interviewed. And I got on really well with the editor. He was a great guy called Bernie Vickers, an absolute legend. And I got on really well with him. And I thought that went quite well. I've maybe got a chance here. But the thing that worried me was I was #1 in a list of 13 interviews. And I thought by the time he gets to number 12 and 13, he'll have forgotten the guy that he interviewed 3 weeks previously. But they came back and offered me the job. And I started on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, 1983. That was my first day at work at the Daily Record. And
wow.
And here we are today, kind of thing.
And so you were the original Stig. They were like unmasking the Disco Kid, from so that's almost like a mammoth leap, isn't it? From how sometimes fate plays its hand and destiny plays its hand. That's such a mammoth feat, with the greatest respect to the East End of Glasgow, in a wee local newspaper. To the biggest selling newspaper in Scotland, and like in one bound, if you like.
Yeah, but I mean, what was happening then was it was a kind of changing time, because that was 83, and Fleet Street had suddenly cottoned onto the fact that young people bought newspapers. And what young people like? They like fashion, clothes, and they like music. So the two biggest papers in the country were the Sun and the Mirror, and they both had dedicated pop writers. So the Sun had a guy called John Blake, who did the Bazaar column.
Right.
Piers Morgan also once upon a time did the Bazaar column. He followed a few years on it, but the Sun's original guy was a guy called John Blake, and the Mirror's guy was a great guy called Rick Skye, hilarious guy. I spent a lot of time with Rick Skye. So they had a pop column in every day of the week, every 6 days a week in both papers. So the Record thought, oh, they've got one, we better get one as well. So suddenly I was in the Record, and talk about hitting the ground running. I mean, literally, I thought, they'll give me a couple of weeks to ease myself in. Not a chance. The first day I was there, right, what have you got? We're a daily paper. We print 6 days a week, and at that time, the Record was selling 850,000 copies a day.
When they say, Billy, what have you got? What do they mean, what have you got?
Well, you're a music writer, so like a sports writer writes sports stories for the paper. They had a motoring correspondent who wrote about cars. They had a political correspondent who wrote about politics. So it stands to reason that the music guy is going to write about music. So I think one of the first people I ever interviewed for the Record was Ian Dury. Of Ian Dury and the Blockheads. He was up at the Albany Hotel when I went up and sat and interviewed Ian Dury, and he was great. That was the start. I had a really good relationship with him over the years, and that was the start of it. I also remember doing a big piece on the guys from Spandau Ballet, because I got to know them pretty well. The Simple Minds guys I knew well. Orange Juice, the Associates, all that kind of stuff. So they were looking for me just to come up with stuff, and it became sort of easier, because once the record companies and the PR people in London saw that the Record were kind of dedicating a writer to covering music for the paper, they would start putting things your way. But before that, they never ever did that, because there wasn't, if anybody phoned up from London saying, I've got this new band called Spandau Ballet, before I came along, you were going to get Spandau Ballet interviewed by some guy in his late 40s or early 50s, so that the band wouldn't be able to, he would know nothing about the band, and they wouldn't be able to relate to him, kind of thing.
So when they say, sorry to interrupt, when they say, what have you got? Are they? So I'm just trying to think of a young journalist here watching Billy Sloan and looking back in Billy's career, and I'm sure it doesn't change much by today's standards. When they say, what have you got? Are they expecting you to hit the streets and find interviews?
Absolutely, because the news reporters, that's exactly what they're expected to do. A lot of stuff will land in their lap, but a lot of stuff that they were covering was stuff that they were generating themselves.
Yeah.
Same with the sports reporters. Rangers and Celtic have always been big sellers in West Central Scotland, so it would be up to, at that time, the sports reporters were the dream team. Alec Cameron, they called him Chiefy because he was the chief reporter. A guy called Roger Bailey, great guy, very good operator. The boxing writer was a guy called Dick Curry, who sadly just passed away in the last couple of weeks. But you went from the local paper in Springburn in the north of Glasgow into the first 11. So it was almost like going from the Vauxhall Conference League straight into the Premiership.
Yeah.
So they didn't get you in. They didn't sign you from a team in the Vauxhall Conference if they didn't think you had the ability to play in the Premiership. So the editor, Bernie Vickers, had seen some of the articles I'd written for the Sunday Mail and thought, this guy's good. I'm going to give him a chance in my paper. And when I went in, now, when I started, I think the salary they offered me when I started, and it was a lot of money then, obviously, I think was £12,500 or something a year. And I remember going to my mate and saying, look, everybody else is on much more than that. They're not really breaking the bank. They're only offering me they're only offering me 12.5 grand a year. And my mate said, look, never mind that. Just get your feet in the door, show them what you can do, and it'll level itself off. And in those days, it wouldn't happen now, but in those days, the editor every year could make what he called a merit payment. So if he thought somebody had done a good job, he could say, right, I'm going to give you another $2,000 onto your salary or something. So when I started, I was on 12.5 grand a year when everybody else was on about 20 or 25 grand a year. So I was on half of what they were making. But over the next few years, there was a sort of parity as I sort of slowly but surely caught up. But, it sounds cheesy to say, it wasn't really for the money. I mean, I was basically getting paid as an extension of my hobby. I mean, after going to that first gig and after buying that first record, all I wanted to do was go and see bands playing live and buy records. And now record companies were sending me free records. And they were phoning up saying, so-and-so's playing at the Apollo next. The Police are playing at the Apollo next Friday. I'm going to send you 2 tickets. Would you like to go? I mean,
so how does a young guy then, like, a young Billy Sloan, that's when they're saying, what have you got for us? How did you find it? What's your source? How do you get? How does Billy Sloan know who's coming to Glasgow, or how does Billy Sloan know not only who's coming to Glasgow? How does he know when he needs to go to London, or whether? How do you know these things?
Well, in the good old days, and you're old enough to remember, and again, a whole load of people listening to this won't know what you're talking about. But in the good old days, you had the famous 4, the music papers. So on a Wednesday, you went down to the newsagents and you bought Sounds. And then on the Thursday, you bought NME, Melody Maker, and Record Mirror. And it took you a whole week to read them. And by the time you'd finished reading them, it was next Wednesday and Sounds would come out again. So you would see in Sounds that, Spandau Ballet had just, announced a UK tour and they were coming to play at the Apollo or whatever. So you would then go on to Spandau Ballet's PR and go, look, the band are going to be playing, in 2 months' time, can we get an interview with Gary Kemp and Tony Hadley? But then because, as I say, the record suddenly for the first time ever had a dedicated music writer, the PR companies and the record labels in London would phone you up and offer you stuff. And so they would say, now you think of the what was that, 15 and a half year old Billy Sloan on the 21st of October 1971 going to see the Who at the Greens Playhouse, right? And there's my 4 heroes: John Entwistle, Roger Daltrey, Keith Moon, and Pete Townsend up on that stage, right? Spin on, that's 71. So spin on to 84, which is what, 13 years later. And somebody's phoning up from London saying, Pete Townsend's just bringing a new solo album out. We'd like you to do an interview with him for the paper. Can you be doing it at such and such a hotel in London next Tuesday at 2:30? You can interview him for 30 minutes and we'll give you an extra 15 minutes at the end to do some pictures. It's a no-brainer. If they'd have said you could get 30 seconds with Pete Townsend, you would have gone for that. So, you were up and down, sometimes you were up and down to London 2 or 3 times a week. It just depended, London being the epicenter of the music industry, but it just depended on, who was available. But, and the other thing I used to do was, and I started it, and I'm proud to say that I did start it, was that anytime we interviewed somebody, if it was somebody that I particularly liked, say like a Pete Townsend or a Paul McCartney or a Rod Stewart, I would ask to get a picture taken with them. So, as you well know, I've got endless boxes full of me standing with my arm round, get somebody in a headlock, getting my picture taken with them. But there was a kind of twofold reason for that. And number one was, a lot of these artists and a lot of these stars had all the sort of managers and PR people and minders and all that kind of stuff run about them, and you couldn't get to them. And a lot of times you pick up the paper, even now, and it'll say James Gilmore interviews, Bruce Springsteen. And you would have to say in your heart of hearts, did James Gilmore sit in a room and interview Bruce Springsteen, or did the PR person just send them a press release with 5 pairs of quotes? I mean, it's easier now because you can go on the internet and find anything you like.
Yeah.
So the purpose of the photograph of me and the artist was twofold. Number one was it showed that, if you can't get near Bruce Springsteen or David Bowie or Paul McCartney, our guy can. and we say here that Billy Sloan talks to Paul McCartney, and here is 100% proof that he did talk to Paul McCartney, because here's a picture in together. But, from a selfish point of view, I always took the opinion that you were maybe only going to get once in your life, one opportunity in your life to sit in a room with Paul McCartney. Luckily, it's happened to me 4 or 5 times. But, you're maybe only going to get once in your life to interview, the guy who was a founder member of the Beatles. You would be crazy. You'd be absolutely crazy not to have some kind of record of it.
I'm sitting here with a young guy who's mad on Paul McCartney.
Well, to sit with Paul McCartney, he's telling you how he used to sit at the table in his mother and father's house in Liverpool, writing songs with John Lennon, the two of them would have their guitars and they would trade lines and stuff. So I always took the opinion that, you would be crazy not to have some kind of record of it. And the other thing I used to do was, the London guys never ever asked them for autographs or anything, because they were always kind of too cool for school. And the London guys always thought that they were bigger stars than the stars they were interviewing. So in the very, very, very odd occasion that they would ask somebody for an autograph, and Elton John would say, "Who's it for?" They would go, "Oh, it's for my wee sister's pals, paper boy's nephew." It was never for them, right? Whereas if Elton John said to me, "Who's it for?" I would say, an album, "It's for me." And they would go, "What?" Because you weren't supposed to do that stuff. But I just thought, if you're sitting in a room with Bruce Springsteen, or sitting in a room with Brian Wilson, or sitting in a room with David Bowie, you would be nuts not to have some kind of lasting memento of it. People will say, I used to share an office with a guy, and when we were having arguments, which was quite frequently, he would say, the problem with you is you're nothing but a fan with a typewriter. And he took that as the ultimate put down. I took that as the ultimate compliment, because I think when you stop being the fan with the typewriter, when you get too tired and jaded and bored, and you've been there, seen it, done it, got the t-shirt, just walk off the field of play. Go and see a movie, or go and walk the dog, or lie on the couch and have a snooze or something. Don't dare, if it's a chore. And it's never been a chore. I mean, recently we did an interview with Angus Young. He was in Australia on Zoom and I was here. And the day before it, I'd still did all my homework and all my notes and all my research, as I normally do. And then 10 minutes before you're due to go live with Angus Young, your stomach's churning, because the guy's one of the biggest stars in the world. We did Tom Jones last week. I've interviewed Tom Jones 7, 8, 9 times. He knows me, I know him. But you still get nervous of interviewing somebody of the caliber of Tom Jones, sitting in the back of a limousine going through London with Muhammad Ali. Interviewing Muhammad Ali in the back of a limousine and hanging about with him for the day. It's beyond your wildest dreams. It's like, if somebody would have said, right, here's the deal, you can join the Daily Record and we'll give you 12.5 grand a year salary to do all that, or it's 12.5 grand a year to do that, but you need to give us the 12.5 grand. I'd probably, if I'd had the money, said, "Aye, okay."
Yeah.
Because you're suddenly sitting in a room with, and I've been lucky, Springsteen, Brian Wilson, Ray Davies, Elton John, Paul McCartney, Rod Stewart, Bono of U2, Neil Diamond, Tom Jones, Tina Turner, Cher, Paul Simon, Angus Young of AC/DC. These are the guys. These are the guys that wrote the book. The list is endless, and you think that you've sat and kind of, they've treated you as an equal and they've treated you professionally. And, you've Al Pacino, that was another highlight of my life. And, to think that you've sat on a stage at the Armadillo in Glasgow in front of 3,500 people who've paid a minimum of 150 quid a ticket to interview Al Pacino for 2 hours.
I know, and I remember that because I had dinner with you that week.
And at the end of the interview, I got him to sign a poster, and he wrote on the poster, "To Billy, my favourite, Al Pacino." So Michael Corleone said I was his favourite interviewer. That's good enough for me. That'll do me.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, and I do remember that, as I said, because you and I had went out. I wasn't living in Scotland at the time, and I do remember how. No, I don't think apprehensive is the word, but I remember how much effort and how much steam you were putting into it, because this was Al Pacino, and not was it just wasn't only an interview. I mean, you did many interviews on TV when you worked with STV and you did many interviews at Tea in the Park, and you've did many interviews at backstage at festivals, and you've interviewed Bono and you've interviewed Brian Ferry, and as you say, they're endless. But this is not just an interview. This is people that have paid their hard-earned money, and as you say, the minimum was £150. From what I can gather, some of them went up to like thousands of pounds to meet and greet. But the whole interview lies on the strength of the guy that's interviewing Al Pacino to get the information out of him. I mean, that...
He came to Scotland, and I got in touch with the promoter, and I said, does he bring somebody with him? Because I just thought he'd bring, some friend from New York who was a radio DJ or a TV presenter, and he would ask the questions. They said, no, he doesn't bring anybody with him. He likes to get somebody from the locale because he likes it to be nice and spontaneous so that he doesn't know what's going to happen. So I quite literally spent about 10 weeks every night, without fail, every night sitting up, reading, going on the internet, watching all the movies again. I mean, I'd already seen a lot of the movies, but I watched all the Godfather movies. I watched, Panic in Needle Park, I watched, Serpico, all the movies again, right? At the end of all that, I could have gone on Mastermind with Al Pacino as my specialist subject, and I would have got a good mark, right?
Yeah.
And what I didn't want to do is, the cheapest ticket I think was £150, and the dearest ticket was £7,000. And that was for a special one-on-one audience with him backstage, right? And actually, 6 people took that option up. So before he'd even stepped on stage, there was 42 grand in the kitty from that alone, right? And I just didn't want anybody saying Pacino was great, because he is great, but the guy who was interviewing didn't know what he was talking about. Now, it was a Tuesday night when we did it at the Armadillo, and the previous Saturday, he'd done a similar thing in Leeds. It was a wee bit different. It was in a big marquee thing next to Elland Road Football Club, Leeds' stadium, and it was a dinner. And Al Pacino came on 2/3 of the way through the dinner, and he was interviewed for an hour. So it was a slightly different format. It was a bit more kind of, riotous, and, folk were all drinking and eating and, blah, blah, blah. And it was quite a famous DJ who interviewed him, right? I'm not going to say who he is, but he's very, very well known, a guy, a very well-known DJ. And I asked the promoter, it was a different promoter, I asked the promoter if I could come down off my own back to Leeds, just to sit at the back, just to get a flavour of what Al Pacino was like, to see if he had a good sense of humour, and, what kind of questions he reacted to and what kind of questions he didn't react to, and that kind of thing. Just to get a sort of flavour of the man, because you're only ever going to get one chance of doing it. And I just wanted to make sure that I gave it my best shot. And I couldn't believe it, because in my opinion, and I stress it's in my opinion, the famous DJ, was busking it. He got about 2 or 3 questions into the thing, and I turned into the girl that was with me, a friend of mine, and I said, he's winging it. He's not done his homework, in my opinion. Yeah. Again, I stress, he's looked at Wikipedia during the week, and he's watched a couple of clips on YouTube. But it was very underwhelming, let's just say, right? So by the time Pacino came to Glasgow, I was crammed, full of information. So, I mean, I was in the dressing room. I had this dressing room, which was basically a wee sort of concrete box around the back of the Armadillo, the stage. And there was a knock on the door, and the promoter's rep came and said, I'm sending out for some food. Do you want me to get you something for later? And I went, no, it's okay. I don't want anything. And he went, take some noodles or something. We're going to go to the Chinese. Take some noodles. I said, no, I do. What about some pakora? I'll get you some. Somebody's wanting Indian. I'll get you some. I said, what about pizza? And I went, no, I really don't want. It's a long night. You better eat some. And I said, look, I'm already shiting myself. I don't want to be shiting myself with, a portion of pakora lying in the pit of my stomach. I don't want a thing. Just leave, right? So then there was another knock on the door about 5:20, and the guy came to the door and said, Mr. Pacino's arrived in the building. He wants to say hi. So I was like, wow. So I got onto the stage. The Armadillo's completely empty. All there is on the stage is 2 sort of armchairs with a wee table in the middle with a vase with a flower in it, and 2 bottles of water and 2 microphones. And I walk on stage, and there's Al Pacino sitting in one of the seats. And I sat down in the other seat, and he was incredibly nice and incredibly professional. He said, "Hi, Billy, it's really lovely to meet you." He says, "I'm just doing a wee bit of a sound check here. I won't keep you a second, because at the end of the 2-hour show, for the last 15, 20 minutes, he either did a monologue from some play that he'd appeared in, or he did some kind of recital. So he decided to do a section from a David Mamet play called American Buffalo, which is about these three guys who decide to break into a pawn shop in America and steal a very rare American Buffalo $half coin, which they're then going to resell and split the money. And there's three characters in it. And for the purposes of the recital, Pacino was playing all three characters. So they had a couple of kind of teleprompters, with the script on it. And he kind of went through the sort of three different characters, varying the voices. So at the end of this, I said, Mr. Pacino, I said, the last time I heard you say those words, I said, was in the Duke of York Theatre in London. And he went, "You saw American Buffalo?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I saw it on the Tuesday night. And it was so fantastic, and it blew me away so much that I went back on the Friday night and watched it again." I said, "It's amazing." I said, "In fact, I bought the poster." I said, "And I've had the poster in a frame on my wall for the last 30 years or whatever it is." And he went, "I can't believe it." I said, "In fact, I brought the poster with me tonight, and I was wondering if you'd sign it for me." "Sure, no problem." So I was told by his producer, the night before, I'd gone down to the Crown Plaza Hotel next to the River Clyde, and his producer was there. And she said, "You're going to have to try and break up the conversation a little bit, because it's a long time. It's an hour and 40 minutes. She says, "I've got some clips from his movies." And she said, "He won't want you to show any of the clips, because he hates watching himself on the screen. He hates it." She says, "But you're going to have to try and play at least one clip or two clips. You're going to have to try and do at least one or two to try and break it up a wee bit." So I said, "Right, get me the clips on your laptop." I said, "Go and do what you're doing. Just leave me here." So I sat in a corner of the coffee shop, and I watched all the clips and made notes from all the clips, one after the other. And so that I knew, what happened in the clips, so I could tee them up. So she said, "I want a very, very short introduction, very brief. What we're going to do is the lights will go down. You go on stage, do a very short introduction," and I stress the word short. Then show the video montage, which is an 8.5-minute video montage of the highlights of his movie career. Then you will introduce him. Then he'll walk on stage, and he'll sit down, and the show will start. I said, "Fine." So we're in the Armadillo. The place is empty. And Pacino turns to me and he says, Billy, I want to do something a little bit different tonight." And I'm thinking, "Oh, what's coming next?" And he went, "I'm going to change things around a bit." And I'm thinking, "Oh, what's he going to come up with?" Now, I have got the introduction burned into my brain. It will never leave. It will never go away. And what I was going to say was, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Billy Sloan, and welcome to what I'm sure you'll agree is going to be a very special night here at the Clyde Auditorium in Glasgow. The artist that you're about to meet really needs no introduction, other than to say that when it comes to acting, he's the best. And in Scotland, we like the best. Let's take a look at some of the highlights of his incredible career." Right, so that'll never go away. That's burned in there, right?
Yeah.
Then we would have the video clip. So he says, "What we'll do tonight is," he says, we'll dim the lights." He says, "Then we'll show the video clips. Then I'll come on and I'll take a bit of applause. And then I'll introduce you. Would you be okay with that?" And I went, "Yes, Mr. Pacino, that'll be fine. That'll be fine." So when it got to, the show was supposed to start at 8 o'clock, and 20 to 8, there's a knock on my door, and the guy comes and says, "Right, we're ready to go." Now, I don't remember walking from the dressing room up to the backstage, but right. And I was sitting there on a seat, and I had my folder with all my questions in it and all my notes. And I stopped reading them, because there comes a point where you're reading it and you're not absorbing anything, you're not taking anything in. And there was suddenly a sort of kerfuffle of some kind. I don't know what was going on, but there was a kerfuffle in where Pacino's dressing room was. And it was that Mr. Pacino wanted kettle chips kettle chips. So they were like, where are we going to get kettle chips? So just by sheer luck, over in the Hydro, or was it the Hydro or was it SCC? I can't remember. Martin Offler was playing, and the RS McCalls and the concourse of the SCC was open. So somebody legged it across there and got a packet of those big, kettle chips, the ones in the navy blue cover. I think it's the sea salt ones.
Love them.
And Al sat in his dressing room with a glass of wine eating these kettle chips. So, of course, it then gets to like 5 to 8 and all the troops are going, oh no, come on, let's keep going. This is fucking ridiculous. So I can hear, I can hear the natives getting restless on the other side of the curtain. And of course, this is only making me worse. And of course, it got to like 10 past 8. Oh, bro, so much fucking, this is ridiculous. I mean, they were nearly booing, right? That's how bad it was getting. And then the guy says, right, we're ready to go. So you'll be able to tell me this. If you're standing looking out at the audience, is my left stage left? Is it the way you're looking out?
Your left is stage right.
Right. Well, I'm in stage right. So it's if you're looking at the stage.
Yes.
Right. So I'm at stage right then, looking at the stage, I'm at stage right. And I look, 50 yards along, and there at stage left is Al Pacino. And I'm thinking, now, I get nervous at the best of times, even before I do the radio on a Saturday night, I get nervous. But I'm thinking, why did I open my big mouth? I could have been sitting out there in the audience, we're relaxing, just watching this incredible artist. But, I'm just about to go live. There's no going back. It wasn't stage fright. It wasn't nerves. It was sheer terror. So the lights go down. And they show the film clips, and there's Godfather 1, 2, 3, Scent of a Woman, Carlito's Way, Serpico, Sea of Love, Panic in Needle Park, Dick Tracy. Everyone's a winner, right? And I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, right? Then he walks on, and I can only describe it as being like a combination of Beatlemania, the Hampden Roar, and I don't know, the World Heavyweight Championship, all in a winner. And I mean, it nearly took the roof, quite literally took the roof off the Clyde Auditorium, the Armadillos it's now called. And, it was about maybe, and they're all going, hoo-ha, from Scent of a Woman, that catchphrase. And they're all shouting and bawling, right? And it must have been a good 4.5, 5 minutes before it calmed down. And then he went, ladies and gentlemen, will you welcome Billy Sloan? No, I've got my son to sit and record it on his phone, and I've got it on a CD somewhere, right? But I don't remember walking from stage right to the seat, but I must have done, because I got there and he shook my hand and we sat down. And the first question I said, and I'd said to a girl previously, I said, what is it? Is it Al or is it Mr. Pacino? What is it? She says, it's whatever you want. I said, okay, if it's okay with you, I'll make it Mr. Pacino. So I said, Mr. Pacino, I'm sure I speak on behalf of every single member of the audience when I say what a thrill it is to finally welcome you to Scotland, because he'd never been in Scotland before. He'd never been in Scotland before. I said, so I'm sure I speak on behalf of the audience when I say what a thrill it is to welcome you to Scotland for the first time. And he jumped in and said, oh, it looks so amazing. I need to come back here and make a movie. It looks brilliant. So as soon as I said that, all the fear and anxiety I had just evaporated. And suddenly I was just sitting talking to a guy the way I'm talking to you. I wasn't aware that there was 3,500 people out there. And we started the interview, and he was great, because there was a couple of times during the interview where he gave me one of those, how did you know that looks? And the reason I knew, because I spent 10 weeks doing my homework. And there was a very early into the interview, I said to him, you started, believe it or not, as a stand-up comedian. You were a stand-up comedian in the clubs and the bars in Greenwich Village, and you used to pass the hat round at the end of your act to get money to, pay the rent and buy groceries and stuff like that. It must have been a tough existence. So he talked about that, and I said, I believe that your first big break was when you got a role in the stage musical The King and I. And he gave me one of those, how did you know that looks? And I said, so does that mean that, as well as Al Pacino being a great actor, he's also a good singer? And he leapt up out the seat and sung a bit of a song from The King and I. And they're all cheering, right? And then there was another bit later on where we talked at length about The Godfather, obviously, because that was his, the role that, catapulted him to superstardom. And, his hero was Marlon Brando. So to appear in a movie with Marlon Brando was like the ultimate thrill, So we talked about what that was like working with Brando, and, how the transformation of Michael Corleone from Joe College to this kind of cold-eyed, hard-hearted assassin. And so we talked about, The Godfather for about 20 minutes. And I said to him, I said, there's one question about The Godfather which has been uppermost in my mind that I've wanted to ask you before all others. And he went, really, what one was that? I said, why did you kill Fredo? I said, you'd effectively neutralised him. All he wanted to do was say a few Hail Marys and go and catch a few fish, go fishing. I said, he wasn't any kind of threat whatsoever. I said, we have a phrase in West Central Scotland, called taking a liberty. I said, you were definitely taking a liberty there. You didn't need to, put a bullet in his head. So as soon as I said that, 3,500 people in the audience went, that's right, that was ridiculous what he did to Fredo. Fredo was all right, by the way. That was terrible what he did. That was ridiculous what he did to Fredo. So, of course, the natives are all getting restless. And he just waited to quiet down. He went, he had to go. He went against the family. So that was it.
Brilliant.
So, it was magical. There was another bit where we were interviewing him, and the mobile went off. And I thought, oh, for Christ's sake, my phone, because we've got microphones up here in my lapel, and
yes.
you could hear it as plain as anything. And my phone's ringing. And I thought, no, it's not my phone. My phone's Janice has got my phone out in the audience. I've not got my phone. I've not got my phone. And I said to him, is that your phone? And he went, I see it in his pocket. And he went, hello, listen, I'm in the middle of something at the moment. Let me call you back later. I'll call you back later. Bye. And put the phone back in his pocket, and that was him. And I mentioned earlier about the clips, the girl saying you need to show, because there's teleprompters down at the side of the front of the stage, and she would flash up from the mixing desk, go to clip.
Yes.
And, you'll be lucky to get one clip, that a push you'll get two. I got on so well when we showed 8 clips. It's never been known before. We showed 8 clips of all, different bits of his movies where he's doing the waltz in Scent of a Woman, and when he's, running about with Ellen Barkin in Sea of Love, and when he's playing opposite Johnny Depp and I was going to say Carlito's Way. It wasn't Carlito's Way. It was Donnie Brasco.
That's right.
Stuff, brilliant. And I asked him about, the scene in Carlito's Way that they filmed in Grand Central Station, which is one of my favourite, the chase scene when he's running to get the train and the bad guys, and he goes up the escalator and hides behind the glass. I said, the last time I was in New York, I said, I did that. I rode up the escalator like Carlito, and I hid behind the glass, and I was waiting for the big fat guy to come up and try and get me and all that. And he's just looking at me. But in the dressing room after the gig, his manager says, she says, I've never seen him. He actually complimented me. He says, those were great questions, kid. He says, they were great. They really kept me on my toes, and that's what he wanted.
And what do you?
His manager got me in a corner, and she said, I really must compliment him. She says, that's the most relaxed I've ever seen him doing one of these things. She says, and then it was the ultimate compliment followed by the ultimate boot in the balls when she said, I wish we'd have known about you earlier. We'd have asked you to do the whole tour.
Oh dear.
And that would have been great, because I can guarantee that even if I'd done the tour, there'd have been certain questions that would have been common, but I would have changed it every night. But it was a highlight, so you're sitting on a stage with Michael Corleone, and it was a lot of work, but it didn't feel like work when we were doing it, and it's another great box ticked,
And how, Billy, what do you do? When you've come away from that interview? I mean, you've done a lot of high profile interviews, and I could talk to you all night. I really could. What does Billy Sloan do? I mean, that's just with the sheer effort of that. Do you go home to the house and just sit down with a cup of tea and think, oh my goodness, I've just interviewed, one of the biggest stars in the world, and like you, I think he's alongside, De Niro. I don't think there's anybody to touch him.
it's a bit like kind of, you get this real kind of adrenaline rush that keeps you going for a few weeks or months until you get the next one coming along.
Yeah.
But inevitably, you start to kind of dissect it and maybe overthink it and think, I should have done that better, or I could have done that a bit differently, or I wish I'd have got more out of him, about that kind of thing. But you can't get too kind of angsty about it, because, you're just trying to do a professional job. I mean, I mentioned McCartney earlier. I think I've interviewed McCartney 5 times, and it would be very difficult to do a bad interview with Paul McCartney, because there's so much to talk to him about and he's so interesting. Having said that, I don't know if you watched the recent Idris Elba interview with him on the BBC a few months back. And I mean, again, in my opinion, I must stress, I don't think the guy had done his homework. He actually said at the start of the interview, I've not got any questions. We're just going to I'm just going to suck it and see how it goes, go with the flow. You don't go with the flow with somebody of the stature of Paul McCartney. You have a kind of route map that you want to go on.
You need to know a little. You need to know something about him. You've got to give him.
I'm sure that Idris Elba knows a lot about Paul McCartney, but you need to have some kind of blueprint. I mean, I was interviewing, I'll come back to Paul McCartney in a sec, but I was interviewing Tom Jones last week about his new album. And his new single's a cover version of a Bob Dylan song called One More Cup of Coffee from the Desire album. And I was going to ask him about that, but it was that was question number 8. And
yes.
right at the start of the interview, he started talking about that. So I had to leapfrog question number 8 up to the start and rearrange things, right? That's the what you've got to do, some kind of the skill of doing a good interview. But the problem you have with McCartney is that you interview him for half an hour and you get great stuff out of him. And it's very difficult to do a dull interview with somebody who's got so much to say about such an incredible period of music and pop culture. But inevitably, when you say cheerio to him and you walk out of his office into Soho Square in London, inevitably you think of another 8 million things that you wish you'd asked him. But, there's just not enough time in the day. But, when you're sitting in a room with David Bowie, or you're sitting in a room with, Rod Stewart, Elton John's another good example. For every bad interview I've done, which would be somebody like MC Hammer or Mick Hucknall of Simply Red, or Damon Albarn of Blur, or the worst ever was Chuck Berry, right? Just a horrible, rude old man, and I was really kind of deflated by that, because he was a real hero of mine for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But for every Chuck Berry, there's a Paul McCartney, Elton John, Rod Stewart, Ray Davies, and David Bowie. For every Mick Hucknall, there's a Tom Jones, Neil Diamond, Paul Simon, Tina Turner, and Cher. So for every one duff one, there's 9 great ones, and that kind of tends to balance the books a wee bit.
Yeah. So let me, and I'm going to let you finish off. Let me go back to the start again. From the young boy Billy Sloan, in Townhead, and dreaming of being the journalist. We don't need to talk about any of the personal places that we've been in the great cities that you and I have sat in, when you've been doing your job and I've been doing mine. But because this is about you, and I think the 12-year-old boy, that nips into the, what was an electrical store that sells records, and then or the 15-year-old boy that gets into the electrical store to buy and sleeps out to buy tickets for for the Who, and then I know it's easy to say, did you fulfill all your dreams? That's an easy thing to say, but is there a point in your life where you look back and you can finish it off by telling me this? Is there a point in your life where you want to step back in time and go back and say to your mum and dad, I knew I could do it. I knew I had it in me. I knew that day that I went for the typing, when I stuck my hand up in school and all the boys were slagging me because that was a girl's thing, and when I was working the job site, my dad got me this start on the job site, and I was working under the plumbers, and I was shuffling papers around for a plumber's office, and I was buying tickets to go and see the Bay City Rollers because that was in your heart. Did you fulfill your dreams? Did you? And were you able to look back at some point and see your mum and dad and see your brothers and your sisters and say, I've done it. I knew I was going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still dreaming. I mean, in the past few weeks, I've interviewed Alice Cooper, Miami Steve Van Zandt from Bruce Springsteen's band. We'll get Susie Quattro on the programme this week. We just did Angus Young. We've got Tom Jones lined up. We've got a few other irons in the fire. So I'm still dreaming. I mean, I'm 65 years of age. And, I don't think anybody would grudge me if I made the decision just to hang up my spurs and put my carpet slippers on and just sit and do the garden or sit in the couch and watch the telly. But, it never ever seemed like work. That was the thing. And as for my mother and father being proud of me, sadly the two of them are gone now, God rest them. But they were proud of me because as I say, Monday to Saturday they bought the Daily Record, and then Sunday they bought the Sunday Mail, and their boy was in the paper. And then when they turned on the tranny, their boy was on Radio Clyde. Then when they turned on Scotland Today, their boy was on the telly. And and when my dad died in 2016, and my mother kind of threw the towel in after that. They'd done everything together, and she kind of just gave up to an extent. So he died in August of 2016, and she died in January of 2018. And then I lost my brother just shortly after that. So it was quite a harrowing 18-month period. But it was my job to go up and break up the house. They had the house up in a different part of Springburn. And, every drawer you opened you'd find something that was sparking a memory, whether it was, a letter my dad had written to my mother, years ago, telling her how much he loved her, or whether it was a Christmas card that my mother had sent to my dad, just saying, Merry Christmas and I love you to bits and all that kind of stuff, or else she'd open the wardrobe and it was the hat she used to put on when you took her shopping, or my dad's blazer where he went to the bowls and stuff. But over the course of that, I would go into the old magazine rack. I'd go into the drawers next to the armchair where my dad sat, and he would have pages out the paper that had my stories in it, and he'd kept for years previously, with some interview I'd done with somebody, or me in the paper, with Marmoon, some pop star and stuff like that. And and when he was in the last days of his life, he did tell me that he was proud of me. I knew he was proud of me anyhow, and that kind of thing. So like all parents, and I'm a parent myself, you just want what's best for your kids. And if your son or your daughter decide to be a manual worker, or they decide to be a bus driver, or they decide to work in the checkout at Tesco, or they decide to become a heart surgeon, or they decide to become a rocket scientist, whatever they're happy doing, it's just, however cheesy it sounds, you just want what's best for them.
Aye.
And as long as they're happy doing it and it's fulfilling them, you can't wish for any more than that, I think. And I think, my mother and father could see that music consumed my life. So when I got a job, doing something which involved the thing that consumed my life, whether it was going to gigs, interviewing artists, reviewing albums, listening to albums, they could see that, it was something that I was quite happy doing, because I've been in jobs where you go up in the morning and think, oh, I don't want to go in here and do this. I just don't want to do this. And, there's nothing worse, even if they were paying you £1 million a week. If you don't want to do the job, there's nothing worse. But, if I won the Euro Millions this week, and let's hope I do, because I think it's up to something like 92 million. It was 85 million. I never got one single number, but I think it's up to 92 million. So I could maybe, if I borrowed a tenner off you, scrape by on the 92 million, right?
Yes.
But I wouldn't suddenly start buying Rolls Royces and jetting off to the Bahamas and buying big mansions out in the country with 16 bedrooms. and I wouldn't give up my show in the BBC because I love doing it, and I wouldn't give up my column in the Herald because I love doing it. So I would still, I would still go and do that kind of stuff because it never ever seemed like work.
Aye. Well, listen.
Work. It just always looks like a hobby, and the byproduct of that hobby was that in the 15th of the month, some guy somewhere paid a paycheck into your bank account, and with that you got to pay the rent and you got to buy the groceries and you get a couple of bob to go and get a Chinese takeaway. But I would quite happily have done the job for nothing because it never ever seemed like work, and it's still, sit and talk to Tom Jones for half an hour isn't it work? Sit and talk to Miami Steve Van Zandt about, seeing the Beatles in the Ed Sullivan Show on the 9th of February 1964, isn't it work? It's the ultimate, thrill if you're a fan, and I am a fan. And the day I stop being a fan, I'll be honest enough to put my hands up and say, look, I've done my stint, I've had enough, and I'll kind of walk off into the sunset. But there was a guy who was interviewing me for the Herald before I did a column for him when I was 60, which was 5 years ago, nearly 6 years ago now. And he said, "Oh, you've just turned 60. You're not going to be going to see bands at King Tut's and the Barland stuff, are you?" And I went, "Why not? Why would I not want to do that? What would prevent me from going to see somebody at King Tut's?" And I still feel like that. I mean, I've been doing that show for the BBC for 6 years, and apart from once when my brother wasn't well and I had to go to the hospital at short notice, and another time where I had a previous commitment, I've been there every single Saturday night for 6 years. I've never missed a single show because it's great and you look forward to it every week, and particularly during lockdown where it's a bit Groundhog Day every day. Aiming for the Saturday night and doing the show is just great because and it never feels like work. It's brilliant.
Yeah, well, listen, it's been a joy, especially for me, because anytime we've ever spoken in the past, it's always been you asking me questions. And I wanted to find out more about Billy Sloan and the man behind the journalist, and your personal life, and it's great, and I think it'll be a great insight to people. Just going to tell you one thing, which tells me, and to let the viewers know about how passionate you are about your trade. I sat one night with you, and you won't know this, but the two of us were together in the Kelvin Grove bandstand, and there was a couple other journalists, and we're lucky in life that we get invited to places. We get invites and we get special seating and people, and you and I were sitting in the VIP section. I had a wee glass of wine, and you don't drink, so you had a drink of water, and you sat at that gig. And there was a couple of people in front of us that were in the same business as you, and we don't need to know who they are. But I remember just sitting at that gig that night, and you were to the right of me, and you sang every single song, and you sang all the words, to the wee man's songs, and it was just to me it was an absolute eye opener, and I knew that night. I didn't need any evidence or any proof, but I knew that night that all the years that I knew you, it gave me a chance to sit beside you at a concert and go, my God, this guy's a true music fan, and that's what you are, Billy, and that's what I love about you, and it's been a joy speaking to you, and thank you for coming on and to Jinky's Chinwag, to my wee show, Billy. Thank you.
I think you should just do, finally, in the interest of fairness, is tell your thousands of viewers what a great singer I am.
Now, you're pish and fine well, you know it. Listen, take care.
But Burt Bacharach got in touch with me right after that and said, "I'm going to tour in America. I want you to come as my new vocalist." I wish. It's been a pleasure. It's always great to talk to you. So I'll see you soon.
Okay, Billy, thanks again.
Good luck.